6 minutes after 10, welcome back to the CBS Makaiser Show. I'm Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, and in this second hour, we are going to be putting the spotlight on questions of education. Michael Komape was 5 years old when he drowned in a pit toilet outside Polokwane on the 20th of January 2014, and his parents are suing the state for approximately 3 million rands. Now, I'm joined by Zukiswa Pikoli, who is the communications officer at Section 27, to discuss this question, which is about to approach, I believe it's the Supreme Court of Appeal, and to think through what this means for broader questions of education and the campaign that Section 27 is running around the Michael Komape story. Zukiswa, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Wonderful
to have you. And can you, just before we get started, this was in 2014. A lot of people know about this tragedy, but the facts, of what really happened, may have left people's minds by now. Can you just remind us about this tragic story?
Sure. So it was in 2014 that Michael Komape, at the time 5 years old, went to school on the 20th of January, as you intimated. And at break time, he asked to go to the toilet. He then subsequently never came back from the toilet. So it was a long time leading up to when the school and teachers got in touch with his mom to say that Michael is missing. Where is Michael? Has she seen him? And of course, clutching her heart in her chest, she came running to the school to try and find out what happened. So it was several hours as well after that he was actually discovered, or she discovered, his little hand sort of sticking out of a dilapidated pit toilet.
So it was his mother, not anyone at the school that discovered him.
Yeah, it was his mom who discovered him. And obviously the people from the school tried to sort of mitigate the circumstance. His dad also subsequently came a bit later on, tried to extract him from the pit toilet, but was stopped by officials from the department who had arrived obviously at the scene at that time, as well as teachers. And so that's how sort of the case came to the fore.
Wow. I mean, just to think that a parent had to come and actually discover Michael Komape and that the father had to run into that, just is harrowing.
Yeah, it's harrowing. And I think the worst part of it was that they weren't even able to pull him out of the toilet. Like, he was held back from trying to extract him from the toilet under the sort of premise that they needed to wait for emergency workers to arrive, who also came much, much later to the scene. So there were a whole lot of, elements to this make it heart-wrenching. Firstly, that your child has fallen into a pit toilet. But secondly, the fact that you're not even able to grab him out of it and potentially save him. So obviously, by the time he had been there several hours later, he'd already passed away. Yeah.
And apparently the mother fainted.
On sight of the little hand, and just obviously in disbelief that this would be her child in the pit toilet. Any mother, that would be too much for them to take, and it was at the time her youngest child.
Sure. So take us through from this moment of tragedy, how you became involved as Section 27 in this case, and, first taking it to court in Limpopo.
So Section 27 had been doing some work in Limpopo from about 2012, just in terms of the infrastructure issues that were problematic at the time. So it was at this time that we actually discovered just how bad sanitation in schools was in Limpopo. We then also were aware of the Komape family in 2014 when they were making pleas on broadcast television and that kind of stuff, in terms of people to assist them with the matter. And that's how we got involved. We made contact with them and, got involved with them from that point in time. So from then we represented them, because obviously Section 27 is a legal center as well as an advocacy center.
Yeah.
So we then started legal proceedings to try and get their case to court. It took us 4 years to finally get a date. for us to take this to court, which was in 2017. I think you'll remember the case was around November 2017.
Yeah.
And that's when it went to Polokwane High Court.
Wow. Take us through those 4 years and the kinds of difficulties that you found, even as a very established NGO, in actually getting a date for something this tragic.
I think the biggest sort of impediment to progress in this case in that 4-year period was just the fact that the government didn't want to come to the party in terms of firstly acknowledging, what it is that had occurred, as well as taking accountability for that. And I think at the time, there was room for this not to necessarily go up to the to the High Court at the time. We could have settled this without having to go that route. But because they were sort of reticent in terms of trying to take this case further and coming up with a settlement that was decent. And so by the time they offered us a settlement, which was really paltry and insulting to the family, that's when we decided to just take the proceedings on board. But I think one of the most harrowing things is the fact that the family during this entire 4-year period was also still in mourning, right? Because you've also just lost your youngest member of your family. So you're not just like these people without feelings. And I think part of the deep-seated pain with that is that they didn't feel like the Department of Education had come, sit down with them, even the teachers and the staff from Matlodumela Primary School, to sit down with them and offer their condolences and show they appreciate the magnitude of what had happened, because at the time this was unheard of. I mean, I remember when I first heard about it, before I even thought about coming to Section 27, I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in life. It's absolutely abhorrent. I couldn't fathom somebody falling into a toilet to their death. And for me, that was the lowest that you could potentially go, right? But it's subsequently been shown that you can actually go lower, because there have been other instances that have actually come to the fore, and we don't even know about the ones that haven't come to the fore.
When we say a pit toilet, it kind of gives this like abstract view, and you don't really know what's happening. Like, what do we mean here? What kind of infrastructure or failure of infrastructure was in place at this school that led to literally the death of someone who was 5 years old?
So when you talk about a pit toilet, it's essentially a hole in the ground that's just been dug up several meters, and then sometimes you'll have a wooden structure that's put over it, which is often quite rickety in itself. In this instance of Michael Komape, it was actually a rusted sort of steel or metal structure that was put over it. Also, one of the things is that because a child that's as young as 5 years old, right, can't just sit in the same seat that an adult would potentially sit on, and that's how you then have instances where children fall into it because it's too big for them. So if you can imagine a hole with a rickety, wooden structure over it, that's what pit toilets are. And in some instances, they don't even have doors, there's no ventilation, there's just no real sort of sanitation requirements that one would expect from a toilet.
Yeah. I just don't know where this callous attitude comes from. That's the thing that gets me. Like you say, the tragic event and the failure of infrastructure is one thing, but then I just don't get why the government doesn't feel the need, and we haven't even got to the appeal yet, but doesn't apologize, doesn't try to do the basic human decent things, and actually deepens and exacerbates the trauma of a family like this.
I mean, I think also one of the things that one brings into question is that as a state official, there's a certain level of decorum that's expected of you and responsibility as a result of the duties that you are charged with and how you then discharge those duties. I mean, I think it's Section 195 in the Constitution that says you're supposed to discharge those duties diligently and to the best of your ability, and and I don't know that any of that comes into play in terms of how things unfolded with this case, whether it's from the teacher side, whether it's from the state official, from the department side, whether it's from the MEC, the Minister of Basic Education. I don't know that any level of that was ever observed, to the point that they are still even opposing our appeal as it stands, having actually even acknowledged wrongdoing, and yet they're still opposing this. So you have to ask yourself why, and what kind of attitude that then displays.
So I don't want to get into the legal technicalities and all of that, but can you just tell us about, because there's now another chapter in many ways of this tragic story, which is that you finally get to court 4 years later, and tell us what happens from there.
Yeah, so we finally got to court after, as you know, quite a long slog of it. And I think, sitting in that courtroom, what I observed firstly was just the raw emotion that was, I suppose, uncovered as a result of having to go through the events of the case of for the family. I mean, Michael's mother, Rosina, was particularly emotional when she took the witness stand, and particularly indignant when the state's advocate implied a lot of things, such as are you really in grief, or are you just trying to get money out of this case, and those kinds of things, which again displays an attitude of not having empathy for the family, but also a depth of understanding in terms of what they've gone through, and why you would then try and put them on the defensive as though they're trying to gain out of their child's death. I don't know what mother would want to gain out of the death of their 5-year-old child's death. So for me, those were the things that really came to the fore in the case. And just the line of questioning that came from the state, for me, didn't display any sort of sensitivity, understanding in terms of the gravity of the case and what the family went through, and the 4-year struggle. And just what their responsibility, or what the department's responsibility was in this instance. So it was a lot of sort of up and down, very emotional, because it was a 3-week trial. That's also taxing in itself. It's not easy to go to court every single day, and have witness after witness come up, but also have the state try and discredit what your story is.
Yeah. And then let's speak about the judgment, because after that harrowing process, 3 weeks of hearing about one of the most tragic stories that caught the imagination of the entire nation, a disappointing outcome.
Yeah, so the judgment came out. We were hopeful, but those hopes were dashed. So what the judgment did say was that it granted a structural order that said that the department, the Limpopo Department of Education, needed to come up with a proper costed plan to address the poor sanitation in Limpopo.
Okay.
So that's the one sort of victory that we got from that.
Right.
What was more disappointing, though, was the fact that the claim for grief was not allowed, as well as constitutional damages claim. So that's really where we thought it would have been important, for the court to find for the Komapes, just to acknowledge, what the family has gone through and what it means to have a 5-year-old ripped, from you. I'm
just gobsmacked, quite frankly. I don't know the law. I'm not a legal expert, but if you don't get damages for this, what do you get damages for?
Yeah. This is the question. And so that's why then, we've now taken this on appeal to say we'd like the common law developed around the claim for grief. Alternatively, constitutional damages.
And I believe that, 2 of Komape's siblings were paid just 6,000 rands each for general medical expenses. 6,000 rand, that can't get you particularly far. Yeah.
And I mean, that's also the part that took everybody aback, in that how you deal with something like this, and the expenses that actually one incurs as a result of something like this were not taken into consideration. And you have to wonder why specifically that they were denied or given such a paltry amount.
So after this judgment and the disappointment, okay, the order was for, a broader, more systemic approach to infrastructure in Limpopo, but on the specific questions of compensation for the Komape family, the court essentially rejected what you were asking for, and so you then decided you want to take this on appeal. Take us through the process of, receiving the judgment, the disappointment, and then deciding you wanted to fight on further.
Well, I mean, I think it was a foregone conclusion that we would fight for the Komape family to whatever height that this case needed to go to in order for them to get the justice that they deserve. And so we got the judgment, and we immediately made a decision that we need to take this further. Obviously, the next step being the Supreme Court of Appeal, so that we can actually argue the case for the claims that we were making. Yeah.
And so take us into this appeal now and what we can expect to see, when things are going to be happening at the Supreme Court of Appeal.
Okay, so the appeal is going to be on the 2nd of September in Bloemfontein, which is where the SCA is. So I'm not sure what you can expect to see other than us in court arguing the case for the damages claims.
And which specific points will you be seeking to gain clarity on, and what kind of pleas will you be making?
So we'd like to have, as I said earlier, the common law developed around the claim for grief, in that we feel like it's a legitimate claim to make for the family. And then that can also, what can be determined after that is sort of the quantum attached to that. So in terms of how much it is that the family would receive, we have obviously an amount that we've stated, but it's up to the court as well to then make that determination. But we would like the common law to be developed around that, just because there have been claims for grief before that have been granted. And then we also then alternatively had the constitutional damages claim that we were also making. In terms of the fact that the state officials failed to provide a safe environment for learning for Michael Komape, and there needs to be some accountability for that.
I see. So is this something that you'll be prepared to pursue to the Constitutional Court, for example, if the SCA finds in favor of the lower division?
I can sort of tentatively give you an answer because I'm not on the legal team, so they would have to make a determination on that. But what I can say is that we are determined to fight this to its logical conclusion. So if it means going to the Constitutional Court, then that's potentially what we'd have to do, because we do believe in the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the question of compensation now, this is a question that goes to lots of parts of our democracy. We were talking about Marikana the other day and some of the failures there. Why do you think compensation matters? And why do you think that the arguments marshaled by the state that this is about self-enrichment are fundamentally flawed?
I mean, I think, it's an acknowledgement, right, that something egregious has happened here and unacceptable has happened. And I think beyond the acknowledgement, it's also taking accountability for failing to do your duties. And as a result of that, if somebody dies as a result of that, or if somebody, is injured in a way that is so terrible, how can you not want to compensate that person? And I think for me, this may be even on a personal level, but what I don't understand about the argument of not wanting to compensate the family is that why would you not want to compensate them? Is it because they're a black rural family in the middle of Limpopo, and their child probably wouldn't have amounted to anything anyway? So are you attaching a sort of a value on where it is that you're placed in terms of your socioeconomic standing? And I think that's a very real conversation, I think, that needs to be had in South Africa in terms of whose grief is recognized and whose grief is not recognized, who's compensated and who is not compensated. And I think there needs to be a clearer sort of articulation as to what is the reasoning behind a yes-no answer in both of those instances. Yeah.
And have you seen any change of heart in the government's stance? There's obviously been a lot of public pressure. Is the government still standing firm, digging in its heels?
I don't know that there's been a change of heart. I think they're still digging in their heels. Like I said, the fact that they're opposing this. But also, Michael Komape's name has sort of come up now in most of the speeches by ministers and by the president and those kinds of things. But, It's more of a rhetorical sort of politicking kind of, trick that you pull out and you're like, well, we're in tune with what's happening, in terms of schools and sanitation and our children in South Africa. But I don't know that carries through in terms of the actions that follow that. And so that, I think, is demonstrated in terms of the slow pace of infrastructural redress when it comes to sanitation. The fact that we still have about 3,199 schools, that have pit toilets. I mean, I can't. It's staggering. So it's those kinds of things that you can talk a good game, but unless you're going to back that up with facts, then you don't really have much.
Yeah. And again, so many parallels here between, the Marikana discussion as well, because lots of speeches, lots of pretending we care, lots of, overtures and flowery language. And then when push comes to shove, you either oppose legally or you just don't do anything.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's easy to sort of grandstand and you sort of you win the cheap points, and you seemingly listening to people or responsive to what people's issues are. But if the actions that follow that, then that means nothing. It needs to be, whatever it is that you say needs to then be measurable. We need to be able to go back and say, okay, well, since you said this, in 2014, in 2015, this is what the progress has been. And so if we're still going to be pretty much at the same point that we were at 2014, then how are we supposed to take you at your word? And it's not enough also to constantly be coming up with excuses of there isn't enough money or whatever it is. And yet there's money to do other things that may not be as central, as children dying in pit toilets.
Absolutely. And what about for you on a personal level? Was this a story that for you personally became part of the reason why you became more involved in these issues? And what kinds of personal toll does this take on just people trying to work to get justice for this issue?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I first heard about the story, I was in the middle of my living room and I was sort of stopped dead in my tracks when I heard that, a child had fallen into a toilet, because it was just so unfathomable. And it just made me so angry that, immediately after that, we just sort of carried on. It happened, but we carried on. And part of showing how much people invest or in understanding, the depths of these issues, is showing that the fact that 5 years later we're still talking about the same thing, and other things have happened, subsequently to that. So in terms of me and sort of rousing me to action, I guess social justice for me has always just been something that's been there. This, I suppose, was one of the building blocks towards how do I sort of work towards sustainably being part of the social justice system and civil society organizations who are helping families like the Komape family and the other nameless families that are going through similar, if not worse, circumstances.
Absolutely. 29 minutes after 10, we're in conversation with Zukiswa Pikoli from Section 27, who is taking us through the story of Michael Komape, a 5-year-old who died in a pit toilet in 2014, and the legal battle that rages on over compensation, question of restoring the dignity of the family. We'll be back after the headlines with a discussion on the specific campaign that Section 27 is running around this story, now that we've got our head around some of the facts. But for now, we go to the headlines with Gladys Mutere. This question of accountability is everywhere, from corruption to failures in education to healthcare. We were speaking about Marikana. And we come back to it right here, right now, when we think about the fact that Michael Komape is just one of many cases that still continue to happen after this tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to sort of look at it as, the Michael Komape case was more of an illustrative point of just the rot within the system. And I think if you're not going to try to effect change systematically, then you're doomed to sort of repeat the same cycle over and over and over again. And so I think sometimes people just get stuck on the fact that we just want to get compensation for this family, but we're trying to prevent incidents like this from happening, because we've obviously seen that because this is something that's not taken seriously, there have been subsequent other injuries and other kids falling into it. And some kids, even before Michael Komape's incident actually happened. I think one of the incidents where the earliest incidents we heard of was in 2007. Obviously, that only came to the fore once we took this case on. But if you think about it, as far as 2007, these incidents were happening to kids, and we're in 2019 and we're still talking about the same thing. You have to really wonder, where's the will?
Absolutely. And even afterwards, I see at the start of this school year, was it Kuseli Soai? 4.5 years old. This year, people, beginning grade R, was pushed into one of these pit toilets by another learner. Thankfully, didn't actually lose his life.
Yeah, we actually went out and spoke to Mkhuseli's family because they contacted us because of obviously they know the work that we do. And just listening to Mkhuseli's grandmother retell the story and just the subsequent events that took place after he after he was pushed into the pit toilet, it was actually just staggering. And it says to me that the lessons that need to be learned are not being learned, or they're not being taken seriously. And it's now being at the cost of South Africa's future, because that's what children are, right? They're the future of our country. And so if nobody's going to take that seriously and nobody cares about children's lives, what kind of government do we have that's an uncaring government?
Absolutely. And another one from 2016, Oratile, is it Delaney?
Delaney, yes.
Delaney. Again, lucky I say, but thank goodness a life wasn't lost there. But again, just showing that this is a chronic problem.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things is that even though a child doesn't pass away after having fallen into a toilet, they do have other complications that come as a result of such a traumatic incident happening, whether it's physical manifestations or whether it's psychological condition in terms of PTSD and just a change in the child's behavior or the child's outlook of life. You have to look at it in that it's not just about whether you survived or not. It's about what has been the impact of a child falling into a toilet.
Absolutely. Now let's just go back to these wider questions, because the court said to the Limpopo Department of Education, please actually get serious about this infrastructure thing. Since then, have we seen the kind of urgency that the court insisted on?
I wouldn't say urgency. They were given a date on which they were supposed to have tabled this costed plan with timelines. Firstly, they were even late on that delivery to the court. But when they did finally come to the court, essentially what they said was that they can only really eradicate pit toilets by 2026. 2026. Like, are you being serious? So, those you have to really wonder about what is the actual issue here. And it always goes back to an issue of budget and budget allocations and what it's going to take in terms of the massive infrastructure required for stuff like this. But these are things that are accounted for on a year-on-year basis. So you have to wonder about, in terms of the kinds of processes that they actually have in place, are their processes actually working? Is there somebody dedicated to ensuring that those processes work?
Absolutely. Let's see if we can go to Lihlohonolo. Welcome.
Hi, Sizwe, how's it?
Good, thanks.
Rona, man. I'm talking as a small business person, right?
Yes.
And I want to tell you that if our leaders do not see this Michael Komape as a symptom of the inequalities that continue to perpetuate South Africa, we're not going to win this war against poverty. One of those things that our government and our big business are not doing is to look into small businesses to solve the social economic problems. Because I can tell you now, small business people are right next door to where Michael Komape stays, and they've got solutions, but they're left outside whenever these big decisions are taken, therefore resulting in big business dominating government tender system, and ultimately neglecting services like the first caller said, with insofar as infrastructure is concerned. You have to take this as Michael Komape as a new lead for government to look at infrastructure with a different eye. Otherwise, we are going to have many Michael Komapes in future, unfortunately, because government seems to be macro-managing instead of micromanaging the economics of the country.
Okay, thanks so much for those views. Hlogonolo, can you, Zukiswa, maybe respond to that, how you think that government should be working with the private sector on this question, and then also work towards concluding and rounding up your views?
I don't think there's a shortage of people available to assist the government with what they need to do. I think one of the issues that have come into play or come to the fore is that there's a problem within the procurement processes, that there's so much irregularity that actually happens in there in terms of wasteful expenditures and people not finishing the project that they've been taken on to do, and those kinds of things, that projects are stopped and started, people are paid, people don't actually show up to do the work they need to do. So I don't think there's a shortage in terms of capacity. It's about the government itself regulating themselves and ensuring that they are serious towards addressing these issues.
And how can people get involved with the campaigns that you're running? How can the listener contribute if they feel moved by this question?
So we're on all the social media platforms. We're on Twitter at Section 27 News, on Facebook at Section 27 News, Instagram at Section 27 News. You'll see a lot of our content there in terms of the graphic imagery, links to the op-eds that we've written, videos that we've posted for the Michael Komape. But bigger than that, at Section 27, we also have a donations page that if people want to actually ensure that we're able to continue doing the work that we do, you can go onto our website, section27.org.za, and in that way engage not only with the Michael Komape case, but also the broader sort of mandate that we have.
Zukiswa Pikoli, Communications Officer at Section 27. Thanks so much for joining us on 702.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching the content. Like, share and subscribe on all platforms. SMWX.co.za to join the WhatsApp channel. And let's build a new conversation for a new generation. I hear you.